Hello, as Donald Trump and Elon Musk descend on Washington like a thunderclap, the impact of last week's US election reverberates around the world. Will we get a trade deal or a trade war? Meanwhile, in Westminster, Rachel Reeves' budget continues to dominate the headlines with mad-as-hell farmers vowing to descend on Parliament next week. I'm Harry Cole, and this is No Mind the Balance. Right, joining me now is the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary Andrew Griffiths. Andrew, big new job, big new leader of the opposition. Government's making a total mess of things. The budget was 3 weeks ago. We're still talking about it sort of falling apart. The British Retail Consortium out today saying prices are inevitably going to rise. Why aren't you guys all over this?
Harry, we're absolutely hammering this. I've been...
What are you going to say?
3 breakfasts talking to...
You had 3 breakfasts?
Talking to businesses every single day. I'm off to meet Kate Nichols of UK Hospitality, because the hospitality sector is one of those that is absolutely bleeding out from this triple whammy budget, higher NI rates, higher thresholds that's bringing in all of those part-time workers so that people have to pay a swinging cost of NI for the first time. And, of course, it has not been easy for a long time on the high street in our small towns and villages. And what the government's doing on rent and rates relief is a big problem too.
But what are you actually going to do about it apart from make some noise? You're up against the wall now. You've got a Labour majority of 150 almost. How are you going to cut through other than just whining from the sidelines?
Well, we've got to get out there. So all of the best movements, you've just seen this great result in the US elections, all the best movements start bottom up. And I remember a time when the Conservative Party was absolutely symbiotic, the party of enterprise, the party of small businesses, up and down the high street. That's where I have been asked to go by our new leader, Kemi, to lead that campaign to reunite Conservatives with the enterprising entrepreneurs, the founders, the people who are taking risk every day, creating jobs and creating wealth. But that's a grassroots movement.
How much
Harry.
airtime are you getting from these people, though? Because presumably they can remember being hammered by you guys, last year?
Look, we made mistakes in government. I think
Let's go through them.
Come on, Harry. We're not going to do that. But one of the points about the summer was, acknowledging that we didn't get everything right. I understood what it's like. I have contacts in business. My own background for 27 years was in business. So I acknowledge that in too many cases we were too willing to go along with the blob, the consensus about piling on more regulation. Now, actually, Kemi and I in government were fighting from within about some of that regulation.
I mean, there's an absolute bonfire that was required of EU legislation, and it's all still on the statute book.
Well, when the Department for Business were trying to heap on more regulation, Kemi and I actually we stopped that in government. We repealed that. Now, that's not to say we didn't go as far as we could and should in removing the burden of red tape, understanding that even when, and I'm not against the minimum wage, but even when the government comes along each year and says that the minimum wage, which they don't pay, has to go up, that is another burden on business. We've now got under this government a 2-tier approach. If you're lucky enough to be in the public sector, then you'll get, when the government puts up taxes, puts up national insurance, you get more money from the taxpayer to cover that. If you're in the private sector, the part that actually generates the wealth, prosperity and jobs in the economy, sorry, you're on your own, matey.
Isn't the problem,
and it's really hard for business.
The Labour Party is the party of the public sector. There's no doubt about it. They are, that is their tradition, their unions. The problem was, though, the Tory party, as you say, was meant to be the party of enterprise and business, but in government, you didn't defend the guys you're meant to be defending.
Well, there were mistakes in government. I don't have a time machine, Harry. What I've got to do is look forward. How do we get out there? How do we do what we're doing today, right? Which is articulating for small businesses, risk takers, people who are creating wealth. How do we hold this government to account? We've an absolutely shocking budget, £25 billion increase in national insurance, something that, by the way, they said they would not do in one-letter syllables. 25 billion, all of that is coming from the wealth-creating productive part of the economy. If you're lucky enough to be in the public sector, there's a 2-tier economy now. You'll get bailed out by the taxpayer. But if you're in the private sector, you're a high street business trying to make ends meet.
Well, particularly 10p on the pint, the pubs were saying this morning.
10p on the pint, no real ability. If they do try and pass it on, we're going to see inflation. So our government licked that inflation, took it down from 11%, a huge cost of living burden for people, took that back down to the 2% level it's supposed to be. That was good news for households.
It is, but as we saw in the United States and we saw in Britain in the 2 elections this year, you don't get the credit for that. So, I mean, Anyway, let's move on because we could talk about this all day. But the other massive part,
we can certainly talk about the burdens on business all day. That's what I'm doing each and every day, Harry.
Whether anyone's listening remains to be seen. The other large part of your job is trade. You are the Business and Trade Secretary. The question on everyone's lips post last Tuesday, Donald Trump's re-election is, should the trade talks with the United States restart, and what should Britain offer as part of a trade deal?
100% they should be restarting. Government should be absolutely in there now. They should be repenting for the terrible things that they've said. The Foreign Secretary, calling our new 47th, whatever
You're a Trumper?
Well, I'm very supportive of anybody who's got a proper agenda for growth.
Yeah.
The idea that they're going to properly have a look again, something Kemi's talked about, rewiring the state, looking at how we can spend taxpayers' money more wisely, and absolutely getting that trade deal in place. So this government needs to absolutely repent for its student politics sins, the things that they have said in the past. And then they should be deploying all of the formidable resources that this government has on trade. And actually, Harry, what they've done, I understand it, is lose the services of our lead trade negotiator.
Crawford Faulkner. Yes, a man that was hired.
Vastly experienced, had his contract extended a number of times by Conservative governments, delivered some of the best accession agreements and trade agreements that we've ever had as a country, and in the period that we've got back our ability to set our own trade policy. Now, I understand whether it's deliberate, whether it's willful self-harm or merely negligence, but this government, this Trade Secretary, have lost the services. I don't know what their plan is to put that in place.
But currently, the government does not have a lead trade negotiator, is what you're saying.
As of now, the government does not have the services of a lead trade negotiator. And what's worse, they don't have a plan.
What's Crawford doing there? Because the talks with the Americans on a trade deal started in 2019, and here, under the Tories, and here we are. Where are they? They've been iced. The Americans aren't interested.
I think the door is opening again, and they could not be more of an important door to walk through, right? We need to get our foot in that door because we depend. The US is our single largest trade partner. There's millions of people in the UK whose jobs depend on the US and vice versa. We have the closest trade and intelligence links and military matters. There is a huge opportunity now for us to go in there, not under the EU's umbrella. The EU is a protectionist bloc, not under different geopolitical arrangements about China, but to go in and effectively sit underneath that US NAFTA free trade organisation.
You're a businessman. You're a politician now.
Not a very good politician, but maybe a better businessman.
Your words, not mine. Are you comfortable sitting, watching what's going on with the sort of Trump appointments? Appointing. Basically, Elon Musk is running the country. Do you think that's appropriate?
I think it's a fantastic idea to bring people with business experience into the heart
It's almost
of
like
government.
an oligarchy, isn't it? The fact you can buy your way in the door.
Look, government is the most complex human organisation. It's big. I mean, by the end of this government, what we're going to inherit is an organisation, a government that spends 44 out of every pound, 44 pence out of every pound in the economy. That is a vast enterprise. It's a vast organisation. The idea that you can tap into successful experience in other domains and improve the outcomes of government.
Britain needs Elon Musk.
Well, Britain needs, and Kemi has been super clear about this, we do need an element of rewiring. Right? We're spending too much taxpayers' money and delivering too little good outcomes for society. So the job of work of any government is how do you do that better?
Exactly, but the obvious question that should the Labour Party have turned up today would have asked you, and I'll ask it, is, which bit? What goes first? Where does the axe fall first? Pick something. Kemi got into trouble at conference for saying that, childcare costs are too high. Or, maternity pay, is too big a burden. Where does the axe fall? What would you cut first?
I think a lot of it, Harry, if you indulge me with how we do this, look, a lot of this is about the instrumentation of government, right? You'll sit here and you know exactly what your Sun readers, your ballot viewers, what they're watching, what they're interested in. You've got data. And one of the tragic things about government is how little data it's got. That data, if it exists at all, is highly federated. We have, like the US, too many arm's length bodies, not accountable to Parliament, not under the influence of democratic politics.
We were talking about this 20 years ago.
It's people that spend money. And if you have too many people in the system, in the public realm, our manifesto pledged and it was a starter, it was a down payment, but our manifesto at the last election pledged to remove 72,000 civil service roles.
Yeah.
Now, each one of those is creating regulations, finding more harms to fix from the state, and spending more public money as a result. So you've got to actually start working on the machine itself. It's very tempting to just pick one particular headline or one particular policy. Actually, the word rewiring is quite important.
Well, one of the things that you talked about, sun readers and ballot viewers, of which there are many, is net zero. This is now falls mostly under your purview. I mean, obviously the Environment Department have a big thing, but it is going to have a direct impact on business. It's going to have a direct impact on houses. Basically, net zero is now dead in the United States because of Trump. Drill, baby, drill. Oil and gas on the up. China still producing 60% of its energy through coal. What are we doing? What is the point? Why is the burden going to fall? And is it in any way realistic that 81% of our, carbon emissions reduction by 2035? It's madness. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, aren't we?
You've got to look at this not as dogma, not as a particular cult, not even as a sort of subjective thing, but you've actually got to break that down. And within the drive for clean energy, you've got lots of different adoption curves. Some things that are ready now, some things that won't be ready for a very long period of time. So you're right that picking an abstract moment in time, and by the way, this Labour government is pulling that abstract moment in time forward.
The Tories didn't. The Tories were pretty signed up to it for the last 5 years, weren't they? Banging the drum.
The Labour government pulling that moment in time forward without the plans in place to achieve that and without properly surfacing what the cost to the economy would be. You're right that the cost of energy in this country is amongst the highest of any Western nation, and that makes a huge headwind because energy costs are embedded in almost everything we do. They're obviously embedded in manufacturing, but transportation, the homes
we have the highest
we live in,
business electric costs almost in the world.
Heating pubs, heating high street premises, heating the offices, the industrial units.
So these are the people we're going to hurt directly by this mad rush to get rid of oil and gas and get rid of, we don't have the gas storage, we don't have the electricity storage, we don't have the capacity to do it. If the wind doesn't blow, I'm going to swear, but we're all down the creek.
Well, there's this terrible German word I won't try and pronounce, but no, you're absolutely right. And my colleague Claire Coutinho, Kemi, are in the process of looking again at exactly how we do that. The critique of this has always been that Parliament, politicians, passed measures without those plans in place. That's just not the right way to proceed. I don't have those plans, tucked up my sleeve here today, but proceeding dogmatically to a particular point in time target without a plan and putting huge costs on businesses and households is the wrong way to proceed.
You've been in power. You've worked at the heart of Number 10. You've been a minister. You've been a businessman. It's going to be a long old 4 years of sitting on the sidelines, isn't it? Is opposition a bit tedious, isn't it?
Look, in a democratic system, people need a voice. And whether that voice is a Sun editorial, whether it's us in opposition doing our job in Parliament, we are the official opposition, and it's important to people up and down this country, whether you're a farmer, desperately looking as to who is going to be listening next Tuesday when you come to Westminster, the legislature.
Will you be there?
I will absolutely be there.
Spraying manure on the side of the Treasury?
I'll be meeting my farmers, and they are rightly fully seized of the difficulties and the attack that we're seeing on farmers, family farms that may be, asset rich in terms of their land, but have been eking out a living trying to feed this nation.
But only three-quarters of estates would
be
affected. Only a quarter of estates would be affected by this.
Well, Harry, we don't even know that, because it turns out now that DEFRA, the farming ministry, is at loggerheads with the Treasury. There isn't even agreement on the data. I've seen figures out today from DEFRA saying 2/3 of farms will be affected. And of course, we don't know. This is always the thin end of the wedge. So once you bring in farms and agriculture, and by the way, the same measures apply to small businesses. So farmers are getting a lot of attention. The same is absolutely true of small businesses, whether it's a chain of hairdressers, a couple of family restaurants, that lock-up that's making small sheds on a unit. Same measure. Once you bring those into inheritance tax, driven by prejudice of the Labour Party against wealth creators, who knows where it will stop? Who knows what those rates will be by the time of the next election? And in the meantime, it is creating a proper wasteland, a wasteland of our high streets. And who would start a business in this environment?
One final question. Kemi Badenoch, is she going to be the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I really think so.
Really?
I mean, look, you have to have an optimistic.
150 Labour majority turnover, and you know.
Well, Harry, I've not been an MP for very long. The entirety of my life in Parliament was an 80-seat majority that, sad to say, turned very rapidly into a historically large Labour majority.
Yeah,
so,
we can get into the reasons for
the magnetic poles can reverse. We've just seen Bidenomics utterly fail in the US. A one-term, very exceptional, a one-term US presidency based on high tax, high spend, high inflation.
And the fact the guy was, gaga. It doesn't help.
I'm not making any comments about the agility, the mental agility of our current Prime Minister. But look, you ask if it can be a one-term government. That's up to us. It's up to us to discharge a good job in opposition, to be united, but also to go and reconnect, which is what I'm doing, to go and reconnect with people up and down this country who desperately need that voice, who are bleeding out as a result of the attacks on business. The Great British Pub is in more jeopardy than it's ever been before,
right.
and our rural communities feel utterly alienated from a government that only gives them prejudice.
Can she ever be Prime Minister? Look at the polls today. She's got 28, she's on 28, Reformer on 18. Can she ever be Prime Minister, realistically, without doing a deal with Farage and Reform?
Look, what that says to me is mathematically, there's a very large number of people out there who are dissatisfied.
And a lot of them still hate you guys.
Who are dissatisfied, and we need to earn their trust, right? We need to earn their trust. It's not that many months.
You're not saying no to a deal, though?
We need to earn their trust. It's not many months. I know you're going to keep pushing, but it's not many months since that historic defeat.
Yeah.
There's a long road to acknowledge we didn't get everything right in government, to rebuild the connection, to show that we can be competent in opposition, that we're united and have a very serious plan for government, because it wasn't that people didn't like what we stood for, right? They wanted safer streets. They wanted us to control their borders. They want an economy that grows. They want opportunities for their children.
One more go.
We weren't always delivering that, and so part of how we rewire...
Deal or no deal?
I'd always rather talk to people, Harry.
That's what we say. That is what we call on Never Mind the Ballots, not a denial. Andrew Griffiths, thank you for joining us. I think we can all take away what we heard there. Don't go away, lots more coming up, including Reform. Well, joining me now is Reform's Deputy Leader, making his Never Mind the Ballots debut, Richard Tice.
Fantastic. Why has it been so long?
I know. I mean, I think we have tried to get you on before, but I'm glad you've made it now. Look, before we get into lots of issues, I just want to talk to you about Alison Pearson, the Telegraph journalist who had a knock on the door on Remembrance Sunday from Essex Police, who have basically said, you've tweeted something, they won't tell her what it is, and it's being treated as a non-crime hate incident. What's going on?
Well, what is going on? It's actually so shocking. They won't tell her what the tweet is, who made the complaint, and the latest is it appears that they're actually treating it as a criminal incident as opposed to a non-crime incident.
Right.
With racial undertones. And Essex Police are now sort of, they're so upset by the fact that people have complained about what they're doing, they've now lodged a complaint to Ipso.
I mean, it's
mind-boggling.
apparently it's unethical for a journalist to write about getting a door knock, but it's not unethical for the police to knock on journalists' doors.
I mean, it is extraordinary, and thankfully, Alison's got a platform to talk about it. But it turns out there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are getting these knocks on the door, and are unable to do anything about it, and then are left sort of literally hanging in the air for a year or two, whilst the police decide whether or not to do anything. I actually think British citizens would quite like them to focus on stopping real crime, knife crime, rapes, theft, shoplifting, all that sort of stuff is what the police should be focusing on, not policing the tweets. What's
going on? Because, I mean, this isn't just a new thing that's happened under Labour. This has sort of happened under the Tories as well. Where do you pinpoint things starting to go a little bit wrong in this country in terms of, press freedom generally, and then the social media freedom? Obviously, in the summer, we had the, people banged up for what they said, tweeting ridiculous racist stuff. Where do you draw the line? Where do you think where's things going wrong, and how do you fix it?
Well, I think how you fix it is you've got to say, what is the real harm? And I think most of this stuff, and particularly when people realise they've tweeted something daft at the wrong time of the day, and they apologise, delete it. Where's the real harm? And I just think most of this stuff, inciting hatred and violence is against the law.
Yeah.
Fine. But you've actually got to prove that. And so I think it went wrong about 5 or 6 years ago. Social media is so new. Frankly, everybody's learning, including the authorities. And it all takes way too long. And so I think that, unfortunately, I think this government is even more authoritarian. and are quite happy to try and suppress debate. And so it may suit some of the sort of what
Is
I
it
call
not the
slightly
fact-
woke police.
Is it the government, or is it the fact the police are just out of control and have too many levers they're able to pull?
I don't think it's the frontline officers who I think, and judging by Alison's comments, are feeling rather embarrassed that they're asked to sort of essentially carry out their master's bidding and stuff they don't really understand. They're not sure why they're there. I think it's weak leadership at multiple levels of society. That's what it is.
Let's talk about farmers. Moving on, another great big topic. You are a Lincolnshire MP. I read a fantastic stat today, which 60% of all output from farming in Britain comes from Lincolnshire.
And in my constituency, Boston Skegness is probably the most fertile ground in the whole of the country.
Tens
possibly.
of thousands of Brussels sprouts.
Absolutely.
Currently
and broccoli.
ready to be
and
picked
I must
for
declare an
Christmas.
interest. A farmer very generously did give me one lump of broccoli.
Oh, well, you're basically the new Keir Starmer, isn't it?
But
freebies.
They are fuming. Absolutely fuming.
Are you going to join this protest next week?
Of course.
So
absolutely.
Tuesday, the
Tuesday
farmers
the
are
19th,
descending.
that's right. The farmers are coming to town, and it's great. And they'll bring all sorts of things with them. I'm quite
Do
sure.
you reckon
Tractors and all sorts.
do you think we're going to see sort of French style, essentially
who
manure
knows?
sprayed all over the Treasury? Is that
Farmers are
something you
good
want to see?
law-abiding people, and I'm quite sure they will remain within the law, but they need to make their feelings clearly heard.
Is this not a bit of a get-up there? I mean, the agricultural relief is being, people are taking the mickey out of this. There are big landowners who are buying up land in order to avoid tax.
But it's incredibly easy to deal with that point. So that's a whole separate issue. You just change the qualifying period from 2 years to 10, 15 years. And if you set the threshold right, maybe at sort of 5 to 10 million as opposed to 1 million, then you deal with the main issue, which is small family farmers who may be asset rich in most people's eyes, but in cash terms, actually,
they've got about 1%.
they're offering or earning equal or less than the average national wage.
And they're only 1% of capital, or
Yeah,
1%
I mean,
of turnover.
But it is
capital.
it's a lifestyle. But the government bangs on about food
But
security.
they say 3/4 of estates won't be affected by these changes.
But they're using completely the wrong data. The real data that the NFU have put forward is that actually it'll be about 75% of all estates. And the reason the government are doing that is because they're including small sort of hobby farmers with 10 acres of paddocks and that sort of nonsense. So the government's data is wrong. They've got themselves in a pickle, and they haven't got the humility. Unlike George Osborne with the old
pasty tax and the caravan tax.
When you got it wrong, just actually the first loss is the best loss. Just say, look, we've underestimated this. We need to consult more and get it right.
Are you expecting, sort of, what are you expecting next Tuesday? Can it get quite hairy?
I think it'll be a big day. I hope that lots of farmers come to town. Good excuse for a good lunch and a celebration afterwards. But they've got to make their feelings heard, and I'll be there with them. My farmers, I'll be entertaining them, and it's a really important day.
Get some more free broccoli. The other thing that farmers are really concerned about is the prospect of a trade deal with the United States that would see them sold down the river, they say, in terms of access of goods in agriculture and having to reduce their standards and not being able to compete with the United States.
And those who are against any form of trade deal, actually, you can do a partial trade deal. It's relatively easy. Where you know you're not going to agree on something, you say, look, that's in the too difficult trade. Let's put that in phase 2 or 3.
NHS,
right?
goods,
but
agriculture.
actually,
what's the point of a trade deal if we're not going to do the biggies?
No, but again, you've talked about the NHS. Actually, we need a trade deal on things like medicines and other areas where we can benefit and where we can get access to drugs faster. That's a good thing. And frankly, the American standards on much of this is as good or better than ours. So great opportunities.
Not necessarily on.
But that's where you've got to where you've got to work it out. But just because you've got one area where you won't agree on something, that doesn't mean you can't do a trade deal. Put that in the too difficult box and say, what can we agree?
You sound like Peter Mandelson. You sound like Peter Mandelson. He was saying on Sunday that let's park the goods and just do a services deal. Do you think that's something?
Something is better than nothing. Get a deal done. Get some confidence. The US is our biggest single trading partner. We've got a big trade surplus with them. It's got the biggest investment in terms of money coming in and going out. So we should be doing more with them, not less. And what's going to happen, I'll tell you, in 2 years' time, their economy is going to be going gangbusters, 2.5%, 3%. We're going to be flatlining, and everyone's going to say, oh, how do they do it? I tell you, drill, baby, drill, cheap energy.
Well, that's the problem, though. The good people of Lincolnshire won't let you drill, baby, drill, will they? They don't like having their windows rattled by fracking.
No, not at all. That's not the point at all. What they don't want is thousands of pylons coming through through their constituency, blighting the countryside, ruining the environment.
You can't have it both ways, though.
You can have it both ways. You can put the cables underground or offshore,
though,
undersea. But actually, we've literally got hundreds of billions of gas that we are leaving, energy treasure that we're leaving beneath our feet, that we all own. It's gross negligence, frankly. Any other nation that's got lots of energy treasure is extracting it as fast as you can go.
How do you think the sort of Trump White House, the impending Trump White House, is going to change up British politics? You've obviously got Keir Starmer saying all the right things at the moment, but do you think they're possible to do a trade deal? Do you think they're really up for it?
Well, I hope so, and I hope they'll use the good offices of Nigel and his fantastic relations with not only the president-elect, but also many of the team around him that Nigel knows very well. This is an opportunity for Britain, and actually GB plc would benefit by the Labour government saying, actually, Nigel, could you help here? Could you help there?
They're not going to do that, though, are they? I mean, you saw Starmer at PMQs yesterday duffing up for us.
Yeah, but look, there's performance in the chamber, but actually the reality is behind the scenes. And if they believe in growth, which they say they do, and if they want helping us to be all more prosperous, then that is the right thing to do. Because otherwise, I tell you, 3 years' time, we'll be getting poorer, Americans will be getting richer, and that's
You'd like to see Nigel become the US ambassador? Get your old job back.
No, I'd like to see all of us help get a partial trade deal, improve relations. They're our biggest, most important strategic and trading partner.
Before you go, I want to ask you about Justin Welby. Obviously, this is an issue that's quite close to you. Tell me about your response when you heard he was going.
So, well, I've never been a fan, so I was delighted he was going. I then get a call from the Daily Mail who said, you were at the summer camp, and it turns out I was at the summer camp in question in Swanage in the late 70s. Mum was very good at parking me off any time in the summer holidays.
Right, yeah.
And so, yes, I mean, I recall the summer camp. I don't recall
remember
John Smythe. I don't really, but you just look back and look, I was very lucky. Nothing inappropriate happened with me, but nevertheless, it's quite a moment when you think, crikey, I was there. And Justin Welby needs to own up. What did he know back then? Because there are allegations, that he knew and was at the camp.
Well, the report said it wasn't credible that he wouldn't have heard some of these concerns.
So look, he's gone. There's then questions about other church leaders, and the truth is, he's been our worst Archbishop of Canterbury.
Really?
Thousands of churches have closed. You might say it's not a very hard bar.
What about the old Marxists in the 90s?
Well, you might say it's not a very hard bar. But if you look at the decline in the congregation, number of churches. The Church of England needs serious leadership.
Would you put the bishops out of the House of Lords?
Well, actually, I would.
Yeah.
I mean, they are...
That's quite a radical reform for a party you say was a little bit more traditional.
Frankly, we want fundamental reform of the House of Lords. We think the whole thing needs reform. So we'll start with the bishops and have some form of elected, fixed terms.
Do we really need another layer of, elected politicians?
There's a whole way of doing it. We've got the worst of all worlds at the moment. The second biggest legislative chamber in the world after the Chinese National Congress. It's not a great example.
Final question before you go. Add up the Tory polls numbers. They're on about 28. You're on about 18. Tories reform. You could spare the country from what you say is a miserable socialist rule by ganging up together. When are you going to do a deal?
Well, look, the Tories have got to believe in things that are genuinely real conservative things. They've got to recognise that we need growth, and the way you get growth is scrap net zero, cheap competitive energy, lower taxes. Well, they're not being conservative, and
They've just elected a pretty right-wing leader, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Well, a leader that seems to be pro large-scale immigration. And she's not where we are on net zero. And the next election could well be a net zero election. I tell you, watch this space.
Referendum on...
And competition's a good thing. We people who,
but surely,
who believe in free markets, we believe in competition.
Look at the graph. There's a deal to be done before the next election, surely.
We believe in competition, and frankly, what's my price?
What the Tories have to offer you to.
No. We'll overtake them, and let's see what happens in by-elections and things over the coming months. But I repeat, competition's a good thing, and it's a wrong assumption to think that our voters are the same voters as Conservative voters.
Richard Tice, thank you for coming on Never Mind the Ballots. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Joining me now is James Melville, founder of No Farmers, No Food. James, hello. I think we've engaged on Twitter before, but nice to meet you on Never Mind the Ballots.
Many times.
What's happening next Tuesday? It's going to kick off in Whitehall?
I don't think it's going to kick off, but it's going to show a lot of support for farmers. It's not just the farmers who are going down there, it's also supply chains, rural communities, and a lot of supporters of farmers, and understandably so. The straw that broke the camel's back is obviously the nefarious inheritance tax, which potentially, according to many reports, could affect up to 70,000 family farms. And also it's the supply chain industries that will be affected as well, as farmers start drawing away from certain assets such as machinery and buildings and so on. So it's got a wider economy effect. But it is also the straw that broke the camel's back for the farming industry generally. There's so many issues that have been stacking up for a number of years, not just inheritance tax, there's supply chain issues, there's the cheap imports of food, putting farmers at a competitive disadvantage, supermarket unfair pricing to farmers, the TB issue, for instance, particular Wales, and a selection of bad government policies. But this is an existential problem, and the farmers are doing everything they can to raise awareness, including the group that we've got ourselves, and hopefully people will come out and support them on Tuesday.
The Treasury seems to have sort of bitten off more than they can chew with this one. Obviously, even DEFRA are kicking back at it. We're reading reports this morning of splits in the cabinet about this policy. But stepping back just briefly, you know, there are landowners that are taking the mick with the inheritance tax relief. Is there a compromise here you can reach? Is it a threshold issue, or is it a sort of all-out scrap this policy?
Well, I think there's a lot of nuances attached to that. I mean, I suppose a compromise would be to vastly increase the thresholds up to 10, 12 million.
Yeah.
And then you just have a debate about the sort of super wealthy within farms. But this takes into account so many considerations that the Labour government are largely glossing over. They very sneakily put it on £1 million, which creates a frame of the debate saying it's millionaire farmers. But it's not that. The majority of farmers are cash poor. They're running at overdrafts. They've got massive production costs. Their assets are in the land. And for most scale of farmers, medium farmers, £1 million upwards of land, it's going to have a devastating effect on future generations. And ultimately, it'll have a devastating effect on our economy and our food supply. We need to support and unite behind our family farms because they're the custodians, not just of food, but also the protection of our green and pleasant land.
Talking of food supply, the sort of more hardcore elements are suggesting there could be, you know, strikes, go-slows, depriving supermarkets of goods. How far do you think the people are willing to take this protest?
Well, I mean, farmers are, largely been trying to get the message across, but this is such a crisis in the farming industry. I understand elements that want to ratchet it up a little bit further. So there is a sort of toe in the water strike for 1 week, but it's largely to send a message out. Hopefully the government do not do what they often do, this Labour government, and then try and manipulate it and reframe it saying, there's going to be supply issues in supermarkets because of the strike action. What people need to understand is the farmers do not want to do this, but they are at their wits' end because this potentially threatens the custodianship of many, many family farms, up to almost 70,000. There's been a number of, for instance, been protests over the last year across Europe, but in particular Wales, with some of the Labour government's policies in Wales, the SFS programme in particular, which has taken 20% of sort of their ability to grow out, and therefore put a lot of jobs at risk and potentially the numbers of livestock. And actually the protests that the Welsh farmers did met with huge public support, and the Labour government in Wales kicked that particular policy into the long grass for a while.
Isn't that the point, though? You look at the protests across Europe, you know, the French government don't mess with French farmers because the French farmers properly kick off. Aren't we being a bit wet? Surely it's time to sort of, you know, use your farm equipment, use your tractors and bring things to a halt. Is that where you think this is going to end up?
I think what we're going to do is kind of gradually put the pressure on. The main thing at the moment that right across the industry and also political, Lib Dems, Reform, SNP, Tories are all saying the same thing and uniting with farmers and public support. It is about this one issue of inheritance tax, getting the message across in our media, on our social media, and ratcheting up pressure. And if we focus on this one particular issue, bearing in mind there's many, many other issues facing farmers, but this one to begin with, there's every chance the government will buck it because the pressure is coming in all directions, and rightly so, because the impact on our family farms and also our countryside and our rural communities and economy is huge.
Just while I've got you, final question. Donald Trump's back in the White House making sort of mood music about, reopening trade talks on a US trade deal. Presumably farmers looking at that quite worried as well.
Yeah, we've got to see what the detail is. I mean, ultimately, what we need is a fair deal for farmers in all aspects. I mean, I am of the belief that farming and rural communities should be right at the top of the agenda of government policy, also the fishing communities as well. And it's not just this government, but previous governments going back decades. I saw it when I grew up on a farm when I was younger. Farming has been largely ignored by successive governments. And so a series of legacy problems combined with new problems now like inheritance tax means that farmers are not getting a fair deal. They're not getting a fair deal from supermarkets. There are competitive disadvantages from overseas goods flooding the market that are often unregulated. There's bad government policy. And you put all that together, and our farmers are not being given a fair opportunity as one of the most important public servants, after all, because they provide our food. It should be right at the top of the agenda, and the government should be listening to their many concerns and doing something about it.
James Melville, thank you for joining us. Never mind the balance. The farmers are fed up. They're mad as hell. They're not going to take it anymore. I think we'll see you down there on the protests next Tuesday. Thank you very much. Now, Republican joy at their clean sweep last week in the US elections has turned to a bit of tension as Donald Trump starts to unveil his top team for his return to the White House. Joining me to discuss this is Republican strategist Manny Alejandro. Manny, there was sort of joy last week, and now it seems the Republicans are getting slightly uneasy about some of the people that Trump and his new buddy Elon Musk appear to be appointing to the White House. How does it look from where you are?
Oh, pleased to join you. Yes, it's getting very interesting. Some of these appointments are completely unexpected and totally surprising. And I think Trump is always apt to kind of pull a wild card out and be surprising. But the election was just last week, and it looks like he's really going for it out of the gate.
He's never going to be. We've seen the last of him on the campaign trail. He can't stand again. Is this Trump Unleashed 2.0? Is he, you say he's really going for it, but let's just take Matt Gaetz, for example. I mean, how do you see him as a pick for Attorney General?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it was completely unexpected.
Unexpected or unacceptable?
Well, probably both. But at this point, it's too early to determine. There's an investigation, an ethics investigation at the House of Congressman Gaetz, and the timing is a bit interesting, whereby the nomination came out yesterday, and Congressman Gaetz summarily resigned from Congress. There are reports that the House ethics investigation report was to be disseminated and released on Friday. So if you think about the timing of this, it is a bit interesting. What does that mean in terms of a release of that report? Because Congressman Gaetz resigned effective immediately, does that mean that report will not be released? And possibly Congressman Gaetz could be a recess appointment and be the acting attorney general. And Trump had many of those during his first administration. Is he just
trying to wind up Washington? I mean, Matt Gaetz is a guy who's accused of sex trafficking hookers from the Bahamas. Like, as Attorney General, I mean, it makes Bobby Kennedy look like a saint, right? I mean, is this going to wash?
I'm having a tough time thinking that he will actually get confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah.
But it looks like Trump is really trying to go for it and hit a home run, or at least swing for the fences right now. Literally within a week and a couple of days of getting elected and becoming, president-elect at least, not being sworn in until January. We have a couple of months left, but going from his Secretary of Defense picks to all of his appointments right now, potentially getting more and more controversial. But with Gaetz, I mean, you're raising fair questions. I mean, what is the point of doing this? So there were many other picks that he could have, and names he could have submitted. Really, what was the point of this? I think it just distracts from the seriousness of Trump, right? I think the comments I've seen from a lot of people I know were, we were doing so well up until now. up until the Gates.
Is he just trying to keep his base happy? Because obviously a lot of the MAGA lot were pretty sniffy about Marco Rubio being Secretary of State, obviously a seriously important job. Is this about just trying to keep that massive coalition of Republicans together? And is it not cutting off his nose, as you say, to sort of spite his face?
Could be. It could very well be, right? I mean, Trump is, I think, looking, as you mentioned earlier, probably just to, shock the system here and drain the swamp with Elon. But at the same time, I mean, Washington is predicated on foundational systems and orderly structure, not necessarily orderly chaos, right? Chaos doesn't necessarily lead to order. A lot of things that Trump wants to do, especially bringing on Musk, and I think very highly of Musk and Vivek as well. But at the same time, you can't bring the principles of private enterprise to the government. For example, there's collective bargaining, there's unions, there's contracts, which really don't have to deal with a lot of times in a private employment setting. So I'm not quite sure what Musk can do from an efficiency basis with Vivek that he could do if the principles that he lended to was a PayPal and Tesla and X.
Well, he laid off 80% of his staff at Twitter. Is that the sort of swinging cuts he's going to be able to do in government? Surely he's going to get bogged down in the swamp, right?
I don't see that happening because of the fact that I mentioned they're government employees. Just very hard to riff government employees summarily. Without a basis. They have a due process, requirements in their contracts, collective bargaining. They're members of unions, so it's apples and oranges here, right? You can't bring those principles. If you look at like Mayor Bloomberg in New York, right? Yeah, there was a successful businessman. He ran New York City as mayor, as he did, as an entrepreneur, right? At head of Bloomberg, News. But there were so many things that he could do in terms of successful business practices, and there are many things he couldn't do because, especially running a government, right, or running a municipality as the mayor did, and Trump as the federal government, bringing Musk in, who's really an outsider. Yeah. I'm not sure if Musk, what kind of conflicts there are potentially too in terms of government clearance.
I was going to ask about that. How is it sitting, with the sort of, the world's richest man sitting in the White House next to, well, not in the White House, but potentially sitting in the White House and sitting in the transition office, basically doing job interviews for cabinet jobs next to the president-elect. How's that sitting with your Republican colleagues out there?
Look, I think people love it, right? So let's kind of split this, right, in terms of the inside base and the MAGA Republicans. I think they love it, but from a legal, and I am an attorney in New York. I mean, the legal perspective, from putting my legal hat on here, right? I mean, someone in that capacity has to fill out a ton of paperwork and pass through a lot of background checks and disclosures. They're not necessarily worried about background checks with Elon, but more so from a legal perspective, concerned about ethics checks in terms of the richest man in the world, as you mentioned. It's
got a lot of government contracts as well with both Tesla and SpaceX.
Government contracts, basically, absolutely, and just coincidentally, the new office that is going to be created, of government efficiency, the acronym is, DOGE. Yeah. And, the biggest, crypto currency out there being talked about, or one of them, in addition to Bitcoin, is Dogecoin. So,
yeah, which is soaring up.
Kind of that. Yeah.
And also, look, Donald Trump, I mean, if you look at history is littered with people that Donald Trump was friends with and then fell out, not least in his first administration, but in the business world as well. Do you think that it's a recipe for disaster, this? Whether, you think they're going to get through 4 years as buddies, or are we looking at one of the biggest bust-ups in the world?
No, it's a great question. I mean, I hope it's not another Anthony Scaramucci moment.
Yes, well, he's gone. He really has gone anti-Trump, hasn't he?
He's not only gone anti-Trump, and I think he's got, obviously he's got his reasons. But I mean, he was the press secretary for like 11 days, so we could measure things in terms of Scaramucci's, right? And how many Scaramucci's will Musk or others last? But hopefully, lessons learned from the previous administration, these appointments, especially Musk, will be around for quite some time, because obviously, as you know, especially now, there's a new administration and kind of really focusing on undoing a lot that Biden did and instituted, and Harris, and instituting new programs will take some time. And if someone's not around for that long, nothing will ever get done. And then we'll just go through this process again in terms of bringing in new people and just have the kind of revolving door like we did in the first administration.
Indeed, Manny, thank you very much for joining us. Keep us updated. Come again and see us soon with what's no doubt going to be a lively few months. Right, guys, that was Never Mind the Ballots. Remember, subscribe to us, youtube.com/sunpolitics. We'll be back lots more next week.